Left-wing media claims to be better than mainstream media, but what if I told you that they've fallen for the same traps that they criticize? What if I tell you it's always been that way? Kyle Kalinske recently did a video talking about how some poison has infected left-wing independent media, or just independent media in general. It's always been that way. There's a major miscalculation coming from the rhetoric that you hear in left-wing media in terms of what's wrong with American media. So I'm not here to sell you outrage or reinforce your beliefs. I'm here to tell you the truth, whether that is uncomfortable or not. I am actually one of the few actual independent media folks, and I know Kyle tries to say that's what he is, right? And I hope you'll stick with me and let me break down my point so you'll understand why I am actually independent media and why I am actually free to say what I want to say. And it's not the same for them. So let's talk about, is left-wing independent media really solving the problems that they criticize, or just reproducing those same problems with a different label? So left-wing media likes to talk about, mainstream media bad, right? That's the generic take. Whether it's Humanist Report, The Young Turks, Brian Tyler Cohen, Kyle Kalinske, Breaking Points, they love to be talking about the mainstream media this and mainstream media and the mainstream media, right? And before we continue, I just want to make sure, for those that might think I'm a mainstream media apologist, I largely agree with a lot of the criticisms that they make of mainstream media. Mainstream media in this country I regard as garbage, especially CNN and MSNBC, which I regard as the bottom of the barrel. Where we depart in our opinions is on the reason why. So people talk about corporate media being focused on profits, doing propaganda, and they would accurately point out the lack of representation of progressive perspectives and values. I'm going to get straight to the point. The problem with independent media, whether left-wing or right-wing, the problem with American media, whether corporate or independent, is a little bit deeper than just, corporate news, mainstream media, bad. It's a little deeper than that, right? But yet it's absolutely very simple. For the love of money is the root of all evil. For the love of money is the root of all evil. The name of the game is for-profit media. And a very interesting thing about this discussion is the rhetoric that I'm about to use very closely matches the very same rhetoric you would hear from a lot of these left-wing independent media channels. They only apply this logic to other topics. But when it comes to the capitalistic media business, which encompasses corporate news, mainstream media, and absolutely independent media, all of a sudden they're anti-capitalistic, capitalism is bad, and profit incentives, whatever, all that stuff goes out the window. You want to talk about healthcare? They get it. You want to talk about law enforcement? They get it. Talk about the news business, all of a sudden you will, and think about this for a second. Why is it that I'm like one of the only people, right, as an independent media person, who focuses on the capitalistic problems with independent media? They might say it with corporate news, but when it comes to critiquing the part of the business that they're in, all of a sudden they got blinders on, right? They can see CNN focus on the bottom line and trying to make profits, but then they look at a bunch of YouTubers like they're Jesus. You think a bunch of random people decided, hey man, I think it'd be good to help the world by me going around and telling the truth about what's really happening in the country, and as opposed to they trying to make that money, right? And it's not even about just focusing on, their incentives in terms of like they're greedy or whatever. Even if they wanted to tell the truth or do something good for the country or for other people, by the design of capitalism itself, they necessarily would fall into following the rules of capitalism, maximizing profit, minimizing costs. That is a fundamental part of capitalism, which all these folks in left-wing media, they understand it for every other business except for the news media business, unless it's mainstream media, of course. Mainstream media bad, right? That is the level of their analysis. Mainstream media bad. The problems with mainstream media is that they're driven by profits, right? And the truth and reality is not the most profitable. And also, in terms of they're in a business. In a business, you provide a product or service. And in the United States, the product essentially is entertainment. That's what news media is in the United States. I don't know about other countries, but I know about my country. And in this country, it's about entertainment, right? Corporate news, they want to sensationalize. Some crash happens, a plane crash, somebody shot somebody. Oh, crime is spiking, whatever it is. Whatever it is to draw those eyeballs in, right? That's the nature of their business. However, simply being independent media does not solve that issue, right? What is the core of a mainstream media business? To maximize profits, minimize costs. What is the core of an independent left-wing media business? To maximize profits and to minimize costs. Whether they fully realize that or not, it is what they're doing, right? If an independent left-wing media channel is spending $2,000 a month and bringing in $2,500 a month, they're not going to be in business very long. You can't pay your rent. You can't pay your mortgage. You can't survive spending $2,000 a month to make $2,500 a month. So necessarily, a core part of the business is to maximize profits and minimize costs, right? How do you do that in the news media business? Well, in a market that is focused on entertainment, you entertain. You've got to provide, just like any other business, a product that has mass appeal. What has mass appeal in America? Propaganda. It has so much mass appeal that we've been so infested with it, such that most Americans don't even know what propaganda is anymore. I mean, think about the idea that people can openly walk around and say, we're progressive media, we're conservative media, without any concern that you're basically broadcasting that you're a propagandist. And ironically, I've watched over the years as one by one, there have been incidents where they've actually admitted it. So I know they know that they're propagandists. If I were to talk to them directly, like how I'm talking now, they would push back and say, oh, we're not propaganda. But I'm pretty sure I've heard the Humanist Report say that. I've heard, I think some folks on the Young Turks say that. If you watch them long enough, eventually there's a video pops on like, what we do is essentially propaganda. Right? It is so normalized that most Americans don't even know what propaganda is anymore. They think propaganda is telling lies. Google what propaganda is and tell me the difference between what you find and what we have in our independent media and corporate news in this country. The news should not have an ideology attached to it. And this is one of the examples of why, in general, independent media is not going to be able to compete with mainstream media. As bad as mainstream media is, independent media is not going to be able to compete with them. Let's contrast, right? Talking about the ideological thing, right? If I'm a mainstream media viewer, right, I'm watching bottom of the barrel, even CNN and MSNBC. I have a choice of watching the regular news journalists who talk about the news to inform me a lot about what's happening in the world and in this country. Problems with how they report it for sure. Bias for sure. Pandering for sure. Corporate bent for sure. But still, the general product that they're providing is some level of objective, like that's kind of the thing. How well of a job they do is another discussion. But the general thing is that is available to you, getting a broad view of what's happening in the world and in the country. And then they have their opinion hosts. You can pick and choose which opinion host that you like based on your ideology, which person's opinion do you agree with, and you can watch those. I think generally speaking, people who watch corporate news, they're going to do a little bit of both. They're going to watch the general news to see what's happening, and then they're going to see what their favorite opinion hosts, what they think about it, right? Here's what happens in independent media. Almost the entire landscape is all opinion hosts, right? And here's the issue. Again, people watching mainstream media, they're going to be bouncing around between the general news and they're going to be watching the opinion hosts. But if you have fallen for the scam, the myth, mainstream media is so bad, blah, 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 blah. And like I said, they are bad, right? But it's not just because they're mainstream media, right? Mainstream media is not a boogeyman. They're not inherently bad. And again, with other topics, left-wing media, they get it, right? They get that when you talk about these corporations, about the corporate, people thought corporations are woke or whatever, Black Lives Matter stuff. And they're like, listen, man, these corporations don't care about this stuff. It's about the profits. It's about the money. They don't care about the progressive values or whatever. They're trying to make money, right? So with that being said, if your entire brand, so people frustrated with mainstream media and they start watching your independent media stuff, right? And they're listening to you every day, mainstream media sucks and corporate media sucks and corporate media. So you're basically creating this boogeyman that this business just somehow inherently evil, right? Much like the conservatives would like to say, Disney's evil or whatever because they do some Black Lives Matter thing or whatever. They get that's not them being evil. That's them trying to make money. But somehow these independent folks don't understand that corporate media is just trying to make money, right? But they constantly keep attacking their competition, talking about how mainstream media is bad and whatever. So you're basically, essentially, in some ways, brainwashing your audience into totally discounting mainstream media. Mainstream media is just bad, awful, it's totally, right? So if they're turning away from mainstream media and they're depending on independent media, and independent media is almost predominantly just opinion hosts, you necessarily are giving them an inferior package than they would be getting with mainstream media, right? Because imagine if the people watching mainstream media, if all they watched were the opinion hosts, right? They didn't watch the general news at 10, or whatever it is, whoever the main host. They didn't watch that. Everyone in watching cable news were just watching the opinion guys. Think about how bad that would be. But they're not. They're watching both. But independent media, you tell your audience to don't watch mainstream media. Mainstream media is bad. So they're only watching you guys. But then you guys are all opinion. You guys are all, conservative media, progressive media. No one's really interested in doing journalism, like general, in terms of just telling the news in independent media. And you know why? Not very profitable. And these are capitalists, right? The Young Turks are capitalists. Humanist Report, capitalist. Right? Brian Tyler Cohen, capitalist. They're going to do what is most profitable. And trying to replicate what mainstream media does is not profitable. You see how they're suffering right now. All the money they're spending on reporters all over the world and flying around and on these news centers, on all these different experts that they bring on, and they're paying these salaries for all these people to come on. It's very expensive. So you know what's more profitable than trying to really fully inform people of what's happening in the world? Is to take the business model that mainstream media has where they kind of pander and step it up even more aggressively. Like, we're progressive, left is best, right? And you really, really pander to your audience even harder than mainstream media does. And you make no attempt to really try to give people a full perspective of what's happening in the world, what's happening in the country. You're only focused on the mainstream media, their opinion side of the business. You take the mainstream media opinion side and then you take it independent, completely off the rails. Because, again, in contrast, mainstream media, they have the FCC watching them. They have, if you're a host on mainstream media, you have a manager. Your manager has a manager. You have investors. There's so many different, pieces of red tape. You have a legal team, a lot of red tape going on where this bar may be low, but they have a bar. Eventually people get fired. No one's going to fire Kyle Kalinske. No one's going to fire Brian Tyler Cohen. No one's going to fire Tim Pool, right? So here's the reality. Let's get out of our feelings and let's get out of fantasy land and let's embrace the reality of this human experience. Think about how we are as humans in terms of our survival instincts. Think about the prevalence of dishonesty when you go on the road and you see people doing all kinds of crazy stuff, cutting you off, and road rage, and there's people all over the place. I'm sure you have people in your family, friends, your neighbors. You see all the stuff that normal, regular people are doing. The idea that people who decide to get into this business are somehow aliens from some other planet, that they're not just regular people. So just like all those regular people who do what they do, and you see a lot of greed, right? People want to cheat in different ways. They lie, cheat, and steal. I mean, it's nice to have an idealistic view of humanity, but the reality is there's a lot of that going on, right? Whether it's through relationships or people cheating on their employers or their friends, white lies, straight up lies, a lot of stuff like that going on. So let's think logically. What are the odds that a person would get into this capitalistic for-profit business, right, and not have any accountability? The only accountability they have is if it's getting views, right? That's it. If you're getting views, if your audience likes your content, you're good. That's the only thing. That's the only rule. If you violate that rule, then you fail. But as long as you're doing stuff your audience likes, you're good. What are the odds, considering human nature, that a bunch of people would get into this capitalistic business without any accountability, no managers to answer to, no big regulation? The FCC isn't really, there's some stuff going on with like advertising, but generally speaking, FCC isn't bothering with a bunch of YouTubers. What are the odds that these people in general would just on their own be better than the folks in mainstream media who are humans as well? They're just regular people. They're not aliens. They're not from some other planet. They have the same, problems that we have as human beings. Our nature to be dishonest, to be self-interested, right? The same greed that infests mainstream media folks. Why would people who, they have some level of accountability, they have another group who's not accountable to anyone, what are the odds that they would do a better job and they would be better? And if you feel that they would be better, well, what is that based on? Think about this in any other scenario. Imagine if, and some would say this is already the case, but imagine if this was literally true. If police officers didn't have bosses, they were accountable to no one, right? Imagine if that was the reality of police officers. As long as the richest people in an area were happy with them, they could just do whatever. That's their main thing. Keep the rich people happy, and you can do whatever you want to do. Imagine if police couldn't be fired. I know some people say, oh, that's the case. That's not literally the case. They get fired sometimes, and they get sued sometimes. They end up in jail sometimes. Imagine if there was no boss. Police officers had no boss, no accountability. What are the odds that somehow independent police officers would be better than ones who are, corporate police that are a part of a police organization? What about doctors? What if doctors didn't have any managers, right? They could just do whatever they want to do as long as they keep a certain group happy, right? I guess whoever's writing the checks, right? Somebody's writing, maybe getting donations, whatever it is. If they're private, so they're getting donations from rich people. So instead of having medical be the way it is now, it's somehow funded through donations or something. As long as the donors are happy, they can do whatever they want. They could just botch surgeries, not account. Like, what do you think would happen if that were the case? Can you name any other group, any other business where a no accountability model would ever result in having a superior product than one that has at least some level of accountability? When would that ever be the case? I think you would struggle to give me an example. So why on earth would this idea that independent media is somehow better? Like, you think these folks are Jesus? Brian Tyler Cohen is Jesus? Is that what it is? He's not just a regular person who might be susceptible to greed and self-interest and capitalistic endeavors. Young Turks, Humanist Report, David Pakman. Are these people special? Are they uniquely special in their pursuits with news media? I mean, or are they just good people? Because if they're just good people, what else are they doing? Are they donating to like soup kitchens? Are they volunteering their time? Are they like philanthropists? Or are they capitalists? Here's the reality. Most people don't want to have their ideology challenged. They seek validation and they seek condemnation of their political opponents. So what's profitable, which mainstream media has figured out, and independent media observing this has seek to replicate to an even more extreme level. The most profitable business models in the news media is if you're going after the right and propping up the left, or you're going after the left and propping up the right. And there's different ways to do it. You can directly prop up the right, or you can just be passive and kind of like, you just kind of generally, you're always complaining about the left, and somehow it's like you almost don't see what the right is doing, or vice versa. A lot of ways to play the game. But that's the nature of the business. And again, I want to point out how left-wing media will very accurately point out the poison that is capitalism without regulation, capitalism out of control. David Pakman would tell you he likes capitalism. He just wants more regulation. Who's regulating independent left-wing media? Who's regulating right-wing media? Why is it that they understand the problems of capitalism with every other business but the news media? Why is it that they understand the need for regulation? I'm not promoting we need regulation or whatever. I'm just challenging their arguments. They talk about regulation. I agree with that. I also support capitalism, but I think it needs to be properly regulated, not over-regulated, not under-regulated. We need that sweet spot. There's no regulation in independent media. So why is it that their ideology doesn't apply to the business that they're in and how they pay their bills? To everybody else in every other industry, they follow these rules and they preach about capitalism, this and greed and whatever. But when it comes to what they're doing, all of a sudden, they got blinders on their faces. I wonder why that is. I want to also talk about the myth that some of them will tell you about how they're independent because their money comes from memberships and they got patrons and all that kind of stuff. So they're free to say what they want. That is absolute bullshit. I've run professional YouTube channels before, so I know what the YouTube business, how it works. A lot of you guys that are watching these left-wing channels, if you're not YouTubers yourself, you don't understand how this stuff works, but I do. And the reality is memberships is not the solution. Perhaps it helps a little bit, but it doesn't solve the core problem. One of the biggest issues, again, with their rhetoric is they're missing the real problem. It's not corporations or corporate news or mainstream media boogeyman. It's the greed. It's the for-profit nature of news media. That is the problem. So if you're doing for-profit media, it doesn't matter you're left-wing, right-wing, independent, or corporate, because the problem is the profit-driven nature of the business. And I'll explain why memberships don't solve this. In a business where you make your money based on views, right? It's all about the clicks, right? If you say, I'm not going to accept any corporate donors, I'm not going to do any ads or whatever, it's just going to be strictly membership. Here's the problem. There is a gatekeeper in this business. That gatekeeper is called the algorithm. Regardless of the quality of your content or how many members you have to contend with the algorithm. This video, for example, is not going to get a lot of views, just like any of my videos won't, right? Because I am actually true independent media. I don't pander to the ideology or any kind of groups, and I ignore the algorithm. I give the algorithm the middle finger. I can afford to do so because I don't do this for money. I don't make any money doing this. This is not my business. I have no interest in running a YouTube business. That's the only way to be truly independent media. You have to be non-profit, right? You have to come up with a non-profit business model for it to work. Now, I'm not even really officially like a non-profit because I don't make any money at all, right? But if you wanted to do it as a business, it'd have to be a non-profit business, right? Where you're getting donations, but you're not seeking to make a profit. So not having a lot of members is not that big of a deal. The focus is really to inform people as opposed to running a business, and therefore you're not looking for profits. That's the only way to be really independent media, right? Because here's the problem with the membership. You have a bunch of members, so you think, oh, I could just do whatever I want. If you're a progressive channel and you spend too much time criticizing the left, criticizing progressives, right? And you're not doing the pandering to the right thing. Like you're legitimately, calling out a lot of stuff that's going on the left, right? And again, if you're not pandering to the right, so it's not like you're building up a disaffected Democrats type of thing. You're just like being raw. Like, hey guys, like this stuff doesn't make any sense. No one else wants to say it. I'm going to say it. If you do that, a lot of people on the left who would normally watch your content are not going to be interested, not going to be so interested anymore, right? They don't want to hear that their ideology doesn't make sense or stuff they believe is not true. They don't want to hear about that. They want to hear about the other guy, how dumb they are, and they want to hear about how good they are. So your views are going to go down. Also, the algorithm knows what gets clicks. So the algorithm knows that this is not what people are looking for. They're looking for progressive media, conservative media, right? So there's certain types of rhetoric that people who watch that type of content like to listen to. And if you're just being objective truth, right? The algorithm is going to pick up on like, okay, you're deviating from what's profitable. So what happens? Your views go down. Not only do you not get promoted to new people, but many of your subscribers don't get notified about your videos. Even the ones who click the bell may not get notified about your videos. From what I'm hearing, I've heard from my own subscribers, apparently you can override that if you really, really love the content. So like my hardcore fans that love the content who watch, everything or a lot of my content, I think they're getting reliable notifications. But that's not the average viewer. The average viewer is not watching your videos like that, especially there's so much stuff to watch. So a ton of your viewers are only seeing your content because you're putting out stuff that the algorithm sees as profitable, right? When you post a video, the algorithm is scanning it and saying, how much money can I make from this? And depending on the answer to that question, it's going to decide how much promotions it's going to do. So what's the effect over time? If you keep doing stuff that's, if you're like a progressive channel, you keep doing stuff that pisses off the left or progressives, less of them watch your content, you start getting deranked in the algorithm, then what happens to your members? After a year, a member who hasn't watched a single video, because they're busy with life and they're watching other stuff, and your stuff is just not popping up in their feed, they didn't even realize it, right? But when they were doing some kind of a budget, they're like, wait a minute, I'm still donating to the Young Turks? I haven't watched their video in a year. Cancel. You're not going to be able to maintain members and also attract members if you're not putting out profitable content. Because if you're not putting out profitable content, your videos are not going to get as many views as you need to be successful, right? And the only way to maintain this business, it has to be profitable, right? Whether money's coming from ads or coming from members, doesn't matter. The point is you need to do content that's going to drive views in order for you to be sustainable, for you to pay your rent, pay your mortgage, for you to do this as a business. So memberships, that's not the answer, right? Memberships, you can't maintain or get memberships if you're not putting out profitable content in a country where everyone's all sensationalized and it's propaganda everywhere, right? Oh, I'm going to talk about how progressivism is great and conservatism is bad. I'm going to talk about how the left is woke. And like, that's what people want to see. That's what they're clicking on, right? In that landscape, you're going to just be the objective person. And notice that no one in left-wing media or right-wing media has any interest in actually trying to replicate the best part of mainstream media, right? They criticize mainstream media and they focus a lot on the opinion stuff. But the best part of mainstream media is they have the general journalists that try to both sides. They both sides it too much, right? That's one of the critiques that they have. They're trying to make everything neutral, right? Who's doing that in progressive media? And I'm not saying they should do that, but I'm just saying, as opposed to being propaganda where you're just like propping up, progressivism and, demoting conservatism, which is propaganda, right? Who's trying to be objective and honest and just say what's happening? Just tell people this is what's happening in the country and the world. Who's interested? That's not very profitable. That's why no one's really focused on doing that. That's why everyone wants to put an ideological prefix to their business. Conservative media, progressive media, right? No one, the business model of just like general news. Listen, that's why a lot of mainstream media is struggling. It's expensive. Having reporters and flying all over the place and bringing, like, that stuff costs a lot of money. But you know what's more profitable from a capitalistic standpoint? Is to pander to your audience. Focus on a narrow set of issues, right? Or I'm going to talk about Gaza and Israel and what, right? There's an audience for that, right? And ignore a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Talk about stuff out your ass, rather than mainstream media might bring on an expert. That takes time and money and, I got to logistics and who's going to book people. No, I'm just going to, instead of me bringing somebody, a doctor or whoever to talk about something, I'm going to talk about a topic I don't really know much about. And, hopefully I don't make any mistakes. If you're right-wing media, you don't care if you make mistakes. A lot of left-wing, I think they would kind of like, not necessarily not care, but not care enough to be thorough, right? Because being thorough has a cost. It takes time to do research. It takes time to hire research people. It takes time and money to bring on an expert, right? It's quicker and easier for you to jump and post a video, something you saw on Twitter. Hey, this and that, and Joe Biden, right? That's, from a capitalistic standpoint, that's the more profitable approach, which is why they pretty much all do that. And I don't know if I made this point already. If I didn't, sorry for repeating it. But I think one key thing is with mainstream media, you have a choice of the general journalists who talk about what's happening in the world, and then you can watch the opinion guys. And that's generally what their audience does. They're certainly misinformed about some things. They're certainly getting bad information on some things. But they have people who try to be journalists, and they have people who are like, this is my opinion. In independent media, it's not profitable to do that, right? It's not profitable to try to run like a news, like a real news, like we're talking about everything and this is what's happening. That costs a lot of money. What's profitable is narrowing the focus. We're going to talk about what mainstream media won't talk about, right? So people watching mainstream media have gaps in their knowledge of what's happening. People who abandon mainstream media to watch only independent media, they have different gaps. The stuff that's not profitable to talk about in independent media that mainstream media is covering, they're blind to that, right? They know all about Gaza and what's happening in Israel, not so much about some other issues, right? When a left-wing media becomes just another echo chamber, it undermines the very progressive values it claims to champion. If you criticize the system but use the same tactics, you lose credibility, and the people you need to hear your message the most won't listen. Non-entertainment based news media is not a profitable business to be in. Right? All these people jumping in, talking about their progressive media and whatever, they wouldn't be attracted to this business, right? If it wasn't profitable. And they're certainly not going to be attracted to this business to do it in a non-profitable way, right? They're going to try to win. And winning in this business means you got to get the clicks. Oh, let's do this on Trump did this on, oh, Biden this on woke. That's what sells, right? That's why mainstream media does it. And that's why even more independent media does it. I'm not saying don't trust left-wing media. I'm not saying left-wing media is inherently bad. What I am saying is you've been deceived. Your perception of reality has been warped. You've been brainwashed into thinking that mainstream media is inherently bad when the real issue is capitalism. But it's capitalists that have been telling you how bad mainstream media is because of capitalism. But they're not so honest about their involvement in the very same thing. The problem with this and why this matters is truth doesn't belong to any side. It's not left or right. It's real. And if you want to fix the system, we need to start by fixing how we think about it. Partisan media, whether right wing or left wing, or the enlightened centrist stuff, gives their audience only a partial view of reality. The results of this can lead to bad policy, whether from the Republican Party or from the Democratic Party. Bad policy costs lives. If you're really concerned about the environment, you're concerned about healthcare, you're concerned about housing, then you need to recognize the flaws in the American independent media news system. Yes, mainstream media in this country is very bad. But the reality is, independent media, for the same reasons that corporate news is bad, is generally far worse. Even if, say, someone like me, I'm giving you guys the raw truth, I'm not driven by profit, I am actually true independent media, no advertising, no money, whether people watch this video or not has no effect on my life, as opposed to every one of these people. If people aren't watching their videos, that's devastating. Even the guys with the memberships. But even if I wanted to give you guys a better product than what you would get from, say, ABC News, which no one talks about because what's entertaining is to talk about sensationalism. So you talk about the bottom of the barrel, CNN, MSNBC. CNN, MSNBC is the news that does the worst things, which is more entertaining to attack them and talk about. ABC News, being much better than them, it's not interesting. So that's what they don't talk about that. But if I were to try to compete with ABC, it would be a disaster. Think about that. Even with my integrity, even me trying to do the right thing, trying to keep people informed of what's happening, I would have no chance of competing with ABC. I do not have the resources. I do not have the infrastructure to compete with ABC News. If I put my best effort into delivering the news, and you had a choice between only watching ABC or only watching me, in spite of the fact that I would have a better take on some issues versus ABC, I would get absolutely obliterated by ABC on the net, right? When you look at the whole of what you would be aware of and know about watching only ABC, and when you look at the tiny slice of that you would know watching just me, ABC News would deliver a far better product. If you're truly interested in solving the news media problem in this country, it's never going to happen until you focus on what the real problem is, the real source of the problem. For the love of money is the root of all evil. The problem with American media is greed. It's greed, stupid. It's not about mainstream. It's not about right wing. It's not about left wing. It's not about centrist wing. It's about greed. It's about capitalism. That thing that left-wing media has done a pretty good job about informing you, except in the context of the business that they themselves are in. Time to ask yourself why. Why does their instincts about capitalism not apply to the very business that they're in? Why does somebody like Kyle Kalinske think that all of a sudden left-wing media is infested with, like, as if it was ever anything else? As if for-profit independent media was ever not for profit and therefore having a massive conflict of interest. The truth is not very profitable. That's a hard reality for some to accept, but it is the reality. This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.